Now, is Britain too reliant on Russian gas? Unlike some EU countries, there isn't a direct pipeline of oil or gas from Russia to the UK. However, there are concerns that the UK is still too dependent on foreign imports of gas, including from Russia.
Yes, well, there's been some calls to restart fracking and North Sea oil explorations to use the UK's own natural resources to stop us being dependent on foreign gas and to help bring prices down. But how do we actually do this? Well, joining us now to discuss this is Andy Mayer, the Chief Operating Officer at the Institute of Economic Affairs. Thank you for being with us this morning. Look, we're not as dependent on Russian gas as, quite frankly, most of Europe, but we are still dependent, aren't we?
Yeah, that's right. And we can be independent to a degree, but we are connected by gas pipelines to the EU, and the EU is heavily dependent on Russian gas, particularly Germany and some Eastern European countries, where the idea that we could somehow impose sanctions on Russia and stop all the pipelines that interconnect between the various countries is just a pipe dream, literally. The possibility there would be that German industry would have to shut down almost en masse, and that's the engine of the European economy. All that gas is pouring into Europe, filling up the pipelines, and some part of it eventually comes to the UK through our own interconnectors. So in the short term, there is no alternative to Russian gas, although we can stop the oil tankers and we can possibly stop the LNG shipments once we've got through the contract period, which the government has decided is by the end of this year.
Good stuff. Right. What can we do then? What could we do differently? I mean, there's talk of fracking, isn't there? Shale gas, all this kind of stuff. How could we actually go about doing that, and how quickly could we do it?
So this year, the only thing the government should be thinking about really is getting out of the way. So what they did with fracking was put a moratorium on it in 2019 based on some spurious scientific studies that said earthquakes are really bad, or other earth tremors. And the levels that they put as the test for that was at such a low level that a ladder falling over would have triggered the test. So essentially, they banned an industry really on the basis that local people said they didn't like it, and the government's more scared of local people than it is, frankly, of Vladimir Putin. What then happens is, if that moratorium is lifted this year, the drilling can start quite quickly. It can start en masse, and investment will pour in, and then you'll see a lot of things going on across the country. You'll see things happening in the North Sea regardless. The government has at least said they're going to do that. And while this is going on, what the government's trying to do is establish new trade deals with other oil-producing nations. Hence the headlines a couple of weeks ago about Saudi Arabia, which caused a bit of controversy, but is exactly the right thing to do at the moment.
So much of our energy policy is very convoluted. It's not very coherent. And quite frankly, I don't think the average person on the street who's just trying to pay their energy bills and put petrol in their car really cares about the wider politics of it all. What they do care about is, how will it affect me? How much poorer is the current energy crisis going to make me? How much is it going to cost for me to fill up my car and pay my bills? There's only bad news, isn't there, sadly, in that respect, at least for the next year or so. Would you say that's accurate?
For the next year, yes, but there are at least encouraging signs in the futures markets. So both the future price of gas and the future price of oil that are being traded now are much lower than what we're seeing as the current ticket price. So we're already seeing the price of oil come down, and we would expect to start seeing that at the pump in the next couple of weeks or so. We're starting to see, hopefully, gas come down, but that really does depend on what happens in terms of these other deals going on and whether the situation in Ukraine gets better or worse. So we just don't know there. And in the interim, there isn't a lot that can be done about that. So the government's trying to alleviate this through the measures it's put in terms of welfare, in terms of the energy price cap. And you should expect to see some more of those coming in when the October price cap decision gets taken. But I wouldn't expect to see any good news on energy prices in the near term.
No. And isn't it amazing how energy, gas, etc., can impact international affairs, right? Look at what way that Germany and France are behaving towards Putin now, you know. I mean, do you think they'd be doing the same thing if they were less dependent on him?
No, I mean, you could argue, thinking back to the previous item, that this is a form of appeasement. I mean, what Germany is doing is pretty much the only thing they can do. They've decided, I think quite reasonably, that they simply cannot get out of this problem that they've created for themselves with 20 years of terrible energy policies, where they tried to get out of both oil, gas and nuclear power all at the same time, leaving themselves highly exposed then to what Vladimir Putin has done in terms of building a Russian gas industry that the Germans still need. So what we hope is that they will now be putting in place the kind of policies that will allow them to get out of this. So we're seeing a little bit of that. The EU, for example, is enabling nuclear and some gas projects to be considered as green, which is quite astonishing given the general view that they're quite dogmatic about this stuff. The UK is now behind them on this, which is extraordinary, and we would hope to see that addressed in the government's energy review. They're starting to think about restoring nuclear power. They're starting to think about new sources of oil and gas. Germany, for example, has no LNG terminals. So what we'd like to see is a complete reversal of this dogmatic approach to net zero. Not 100%. We do see the long-term future as being decarbonisation and low carbon, but it's got to be slow and steady. We've got to get there bit by bit, bringing things on stream when there's proper backup, which at the moment is only oil and gas, which is why we're so exposed to these high prices right now.
Good stuff, Andy. Thank you very much. Andy Mayer, there, COO at the IEA. I mean, what this guy doesn't know about energy is not worth knowing.